The faint hum of the Rogue Shadow's engine was the only thing that kept Ziel calm as her teacher faced down a seemingly insurmountable challenge. "Proxy?" Ziel whimpered. "Is Galen going to be okay?" The droid stared out the ship's window and remained silent. The young Quarren was afraid. She desperately didn't want to lose the one person that mattered to her. "I couldn't kill him," Proxy finally declared, "which means nobody can." Though the words were cold, they comforted Ziel nonetheless. "Keep your mind on the task at hand," Galen's voice cracked over the comlink. "I'll get through this, but I need your help." The Citadel Inquisitorius was in chaos, with Inquisitors on opposing sides of a power struggle tearing into one another. Though the infighting had its advantages, it did make the young Jedi's task of finding Ahsoka's son all the more difficult. "If that Star Destroyer does anything, let me know," Galen ordered as he ran through the Citadel's twisted hallways. "I will," Ziel affirmed. "Just promise you'll be careful." With a slide and well-aimed slice, the young Jedi split an unsuspecting Inquisitor in two as he continued his frantic sprint. Unlike his opponents at Anchor Point, the force-wielding opposition Galen faced weren't much of a threat. In fact, the Emperor's Shadow Guard posed more of a challenge. It was something the young Jedi found rather curious. Stepping over an increasing number of corpses, Galen finally reached the Citadel's detention block. Immediately, he activated his secondary lightsaber and cut a hole in the Togruta child's cell. As the door's loosened metal fell to the ground, the young Jedi stepped into the blood-stained room and was greeted by a sight that made his heart sink. Anakin Bonteri, Ahsoka's son, had dragged his sickly body into a corner and cowered as wounds left untreated continued to bleed. The young boy, barely a teenager, had suffered an ordeal Galen couldn't describe with words alone. Parts of the Togruta's lekku were seared off by the blade of a lightsaber. His bones were shattered, broken, and misplaced, making this simple act of standing all but impossible. On top of it all, the young boy was missing an eye, a fact Galen stumbled upon after realizing Anakin was covering a vacant socket with his hands. Shaking and trembling, the Togruta desperately tried to crawl away as the young Jedi slowly approached. Removing his cloak, Galen took a knee beside the boy and covered his frail body. "I'm not here to hurt you," the young Jedi comforted. "I'm here to save you." With a pained gasp, Anakin began to hyperventilate as all of the emotions he kept suppressed throughout his torturous ordeal rose to the surface. "Look at me," Galen ordered softly as he sat the young boy up. "Look at me and just breathe." Still trembling, the Togruta looked up at his savior with tears falling from his eyes. He had given up any hope of being rescued and resigned himself to a slow, agonizing death. In the face of giving into the dark side, Anakin chose to bury his emotions beneath an ocean of apathy. In the face of utter hopelessness, he chose to lose himself so that he would not become a twisted mockery of who he was. Galen placed his hand upon one of Anakin's bleeding wounds, causing the Togruta to recoil. "That pain, focus on it," the young Jedi instructed. "Every wound, every broken bone, every awful thing these monsters have done to you. Focus on them and breathe." Sensing an approaching enemy, Galen sharply jerked away from Anakin and lifted an Inquisitor off the ground with the Force. Allowing his rage to get the better of him, the young Jedi crushed the lungs of his unsuspecting opponent and let him slowly die as he writhed in the air. "Everything you're holding back, let it out," Galen continued after dropping the Inquisitor's lifeless corpse. "Let it all out." Anakin looked up at the young Jedi in confusion. He couldn't make sense of what he was just told to do. "You've been strong and courageous for a long time. You've endured something that would break most people," Galen stated calmly. "Allow yourself a moment of weakness." The young Jedi thought back to the living hell that was his training under Vader, and gently placed his hands upon Anakin's shoulders. "It's okay to cry, to scream," Galen comforted. "Do what you have to, and free yourself." Feeling the Jedi's uncharacteristic warmth, Anakin began to heave while the dam containing his emotions gave way. A torrent of passion poured out of the young boy as tears and screams morphed into seething rage. Rapidly, the metal panels lining the cell came undone and flew through the air without any direction or guidance. Placing his hands upon Anakin's, the young Jedi stood the Togruta up and watched as his wounds slowly mended. Like Galen anticipated, the young boy was healing himself with the strength of his overwhelming passion, just like he had many times before. That's enough, the young Jedi said as he moved backward. Get a grip and see what you've done. Slowly, with each step forward he took, Anakin steadied his breathing and calmed himself. Before long, he realized he was upright and that his wounds were nothing more than scars. How? The young boy asked warily while touching his empty eye socket. By facing your feelings and not letting them control you, Galen explained. Exhausted, Anakin collapsed in the young Jedi's arms. I know it's hard, but you'll have to hang in there a bit longer, stated Galen. We need to find your mother and get out of here. My mom is here? The boy asked weakly. Of course she is, the young Jedi said while raising Anakin to his feet. She's the reason I'm here. Over the communicator, Ziel's voice rang out. Galen, a single ship just left the Star Destroyer. It's heading right for you. Got it, the young Jedi acknowledged. Things are about to get crazy, Ziel. Be ready for the worst. Across the facility, surrounded by the towering black pillars of the Citadel's subterranean depths, a silence hangs in the air as two former friends ready their weapons for a fight to the death. Among the Padawans, Barriss, you are one of our best, Ahsoka declared with venom in her voice. I can't believe how far you've fallen. The Inquisitor cocked her head back and laughed, her long black hair hanging off the side of her face. The Merlian's pale, almost white complexion contrasted her dark orange eyes and gave the woman an uncomfortably sensual aura. It was a fact that unnerved the former Jedi and made her think that the moniker Maiden was a joke on the Inquisitorius' part. There you go again, Ahsoka, Barriss stated as her laugh died down. Going on about things you don't understand. With one hand on the hilt, the Inquisitor crookedly raised the blade of her purple lightsaber and pointed it at the former Jedi. Though she was far more erratic, Barriss had gotten much better at dueling. I do the galaxy a service, the Morellian snapped. I rid it of murderous warmongers like yourself. With a violent lunge forward, Barriss closed the distance on Ahsoka while thrusting her blade out. On her guard, the former Jedi parried the Inquisitor's strike with her silver shoto and countered with a slash from her main saber. Before the blow could land, however, the pale Morellian jumped into the air and out of the way. Undeterred, Ahsoka leaped after Barriss and tackled her opponent into one of the many pillars which lined the Citadel's lower depths, knocking the wind out of the Inquisitor. Enraged, the Morellian unleashed a thunderous wave of lightning from her hands that blasted the former Jedi back. Before long, both combating parties found themselves on the ground, trying to recover as fast as possible. You know, Barriss, I never pegged you as an idiot, Ahsoka barked as she picked herself up. Very funny, Snips, the Inquisitor mocked while catching her breath. I can see where your son got his sense of humor. The former Jedi raised her silver lightsaber and prepared herself to strike. Barriss, Ahsoka said flatly, I'm going to kill you. Taking the offensive, the former Jedi leaped off a pillar and closed the distance on the Inquisitor from above. Barely containing her rage, Ahsoka brought her weapon down upon Barriss, only to be met with a weak deflection that sent the Morellian skidding backwards from the force of the impact. My, the Inquisitor mused while showing off her now limp and broken wrist. Have I made you angry? Ignoring Barriss's condescending question, Ahsoka brought her shoto up and tried to stab the Inquisitor. Unfortunately, the former Jedi was starting to lose her composure, resulting in her attacks, though forceful, being less accurate. Laughing the entire time, the Morellian danced around Ahsoka's mad swings while landing several glancing cuts onto her opponent. This was Barriss's style of fighting. If she couldn't overpower her foe, she'd simply worm her way into their head and tear them down. I was going to be the galaxy's hero, the Inquisitor blurted out as she twirled around Ahsoka like a performer. If you had just acted like a good girl and died, everything would have gone according to plan. Every poisonous word that came out of Barriss's mouth pushed the Togruta's barely contained feelings further to the edge. The friendship, the bond the pair once shared, made Ahsoka's entire ordeal almost impossible to manage. There was passion between the two, passion and a host of other conflicting emotions. You ruined my life by stealing the future I deserved, Barriss declared while distancing herself from the former Jedi. You took away something I can never get back. In the quiet moment created by the Inquisitor, Ahsoka attempted to calm herself and regain some semblance of composure. Barriss, on the other hand, looked straight into her opponent's eyes and cocked a wicked smile. "It's for that reason," the pale-skinned Morellian uttered while running the backside of her fingers down the length of her face. "I took something from your son that can never be replaced." The meaning of Barriss's words pierced deeper than any blade and pushed Ahsoka over the edge. The bent-up feelings the former Jedi kept suppressed were unleashed all at once in an explosive display of power. Bricks from the nearby pillars came undone and sped toward the Inquisitor at rapid speeds. Flooring beneath the pair's feet shook, splintered, and then erupted outward toward the ceiling. Ventilation and piping, once torn apart by the flying debris, filled the Citadel's depths with a thick layer of smoke. Seeing nothing but the faint glow of Barriss' lightsaber, Ahsoka rushed her foe and started wailing upon the Morellian with the full might of her unchecked passions. Quickly, the Inquisitor came to understand that she had made a critical mistake. The former Jedi's assault was relentless, but not mindless. Each strike had the deliberate intent to kill and gave no opening which Barriss could exploit. The Inquisitor was put onto a desperate defensive with no way of turning things around. She awoke within Ahsoka the righteous fury of a mother, and she was losing. Slipping her shadow past the Inquisitor's defenses, the former Jedi slashed Barriss' face, leaving a sizable gash. She then followed this up with a swipe from her main saber, which scalded the side of the Morellian's head. Reeling back in pain, Barriss pushed her opponent back with the Force and fled into the fog of smoke which engulfed the Citadel's depths. Ahsoka started to give chase, but stopped once she heard Galen's familiar voice crackle over the communicator. "I've got Anakin," the young Jedi barked in the midst of his own fight. "We have to get out of here, so quit screwing around and find me." Though his words were curt, they were precisely what Ahsoka needed to hear. All that mattered was saving her son. The fight with Barriss meant nothing. "I'm on my way," the former Jedi declared, her mind returning to the task at hand. "I'll be there soon." On the Citadel's 5th floor, near a railed opening that overlooks the facility's ground level, a lone Inquisitor watches in horror as a single man who killed a number of his own inches forward. "You can't beat me," the young Jedi told his terrified opponent. "So run if you want to live." With a nod, the grateful Inquisitor dropped his weapon and began to sprint away as fast as possible. This was short-lived, however, as a lightsaber with an unstable red crystal bisected the man in two once he reached the end of the hallway. "Cowards are not fit for the Inquisitorius," snarled a tattooed Zabrak as he rounded the corner with a number of Inquisitors in tow. Reaching into his robes, Galen pulled out his main lightsaber and handed Anakin his spare. "Stay behind me," the young Jedi ordered, "and kill everyone who gets past." Ziel's voice cried out over the comlink. "Galen, the ship from the Star Destroyer has landed." "It's a TIE fighter," Proxy added. The young Jedi exhaled slowly and activated his weapon's blue blade. Sensing no less than 20 Inquisitors closing in on his position, as well as a host of Imperial soldiers, Galen knew the moment of truth was here. "J.C. Yasso, is it?" the young Jedi directed at the Inquisitors. The Zabrak nodded his head as he grasped the hilt of his returned lightsaber. "You're in my way," Galen boldly declared. 3 Inquisitors, marginally stronger than the ones the young Jedi had cleaved through in droves, darted down the hallway toward their opponent. With the Force, Galen grabbed one of his foes and threw him off the 5th floor via the opening that overlooked the ground level. Though the odds weren't in his favor, the Jedi found dealing with 2 opponents was far easier than contending with 3. Keeping one of the Inquisitors at bay with the torrent of lightning, Galen engaged the other with his lightsaber. As they clashed, however, Anakin poked the crimson blade of his haphazardly constructed weapon through the gap between the young Jedi's arms and killed an Inquisitor by driving the beam of energy through the person's stomach. With a welcome surprise evening the odds, Galen removed the head of the remaining Inquisitor and diverted his attention to the 5th level's opening. Trying to catch his opponent by surprise, the Inquisitor who got chucked off the side by the young Jedi had regained his footing and was flying through the air with his lightsaber at the ready. Not having enough time to react, the Inquisitor managed to slip through the opening and engage Galen in single combat. The pair exchanged a flurry of blows, however the Jedi's superior training allowed him to find an opening and split his opponent in two with an upward slice. At the opposite end of the hallway, however, a squad of stormtroopers appeared behind Anakin and opened fire. With few options, Galen grabbed Ahsoka's son by the leku and did a mad leap off the 5th floor that saw the pair come crashing down to the ground level. The impact of the landing saw the young Jedi break one of his legs, leading to him sliding away from the Togruta boy as momentum carried him. "Proxy," Galen uttered wearily as he regained his bearings. "Bring the ship around." Raising his head, the young Jedi spotted Anakin and noticed he too had broken a leg. However, once he looked past the boy and at the other end of the hall, Galen saw a sight which crushed what little hope he had left. With a single light faintly shining overhead, and the architecture of the Jedi Temple's twisted perversion surrounding him, stood an individual who was more machine than man. The dark silhouette of Darth Vader bared down upon Anakin, and there wasn't anything Galen could do about it. Remaining motionless, the Sith Lord watched as Inquisitors closed in on the pair's position. He said nothing and did nothing. The young Jedi could sense something emitting from the man he used to call Master, but he didn't know what to make of it. Emerging from the depths of the Citadel, Ahsoka came upon the desperate situation without any time to react. The stormtroopers, which forced Galen to make a split-second decision, were now taking aim at her son. "Anakin!" the frantic mother cried out at the top of her lungs. The young boy stared up at the soldiers and froze. Knowing there was nothing he could do, Anakin closed his eyes and awaited the inevitable. However, as the blasters rang out, the young boy didn't meet his end. Instead, he heard a sudden silence wash over the Citadel and the faint sound of a nearby respirator. With smoke rolling off his back, Vader looked down at the young boy and readied his lightsaber. "Treason, then?" Iaso asked while readying his weapon. "No," Vader replied as he directed his gaze toward Ahsoka. Igniting his crimson blade, the Sith Lord engaged the pretenders who dabbled in the dark side with a vicious strength Galen had never seen before. In mere moments, several Inquisitors that tried their hand at engaging met a quick yet gruesome end. From above, stormtroopers began firing upon the man they thought to be invincible. However, Ahsoka closed the distance on the Imperials by leaping off the Citadel's pillars. Before long, the former Jedi was tearing them to pieces as their blasters fell silent, one by one. Channeling his hatred for the man he once called Master, Galen repaired his leg and dove headfirst into a horde of oncoming Imperials. The whirlwind of death that was Vader's former apprentice made short work of the soldiers. However, there was seemingly no end to them as they just kept coming. Then, after finishing off those on the upper levels, Ahsoka linked back up with Galen. Working in tandem, the pair thinned the Imperial swarm out to such an extent that those still alive, who hadn't ran, couldn't impact the battle in any meaningful way. After exchanging a quick glance, Ahsoka and Galen both decided to assist Vader in his fight with the Inquisitors. They weren't going to let the present opportunity go to waste. Though he hated it, the young Jedi pushed aside his own emotions to focus on the task at hand. He still despised Vader, however the former apprentice had grown enough to not let his personal feelings jeopardize the mission. Then, like a maniac, Galen leaped into the fray as he yelled at the top of his lungs. With a well-placed thrust, the young Jedi stabbed an Inquisitor in the head before making contact with the ground. After landing, he brought his lightsaber up and cut off the leg of an unsuspecting opponent. Vader complemented this strike by splitting the legless Inquisitor in two diagonally. Not to be outdone, Ahsoka sprinted into combat and threw her Shoto into the back of a preoccupied Inquisitor who was combating Galen. Though the attack didn't drop her opponent outright, the follow-up slash to the head certainly did. Instinctually, Ahsoka looked up at Vader as he pointed to an approaching enemy. With assistance from the Sith Lord, the former Jedi slid beneath the legs of a staggered Inquisitor and cut off his feet. Similar to what Vader did with him, Galen rounded off Ahsoka's strike with a lateral cut to her opponent's stomach, killing him. Like a dance they performed before, the trio fought together and became an unstoppable force of destruction. Inquisitor and Imperial alike didn't stand a chance against the Master and his well-trained students. Understanding the position he was in, Iaso and an underling attempted to make a break for it. "Ahsoka!" Vader shouted while pointing at the fleeing Inquisitors. "On it!" Ahsoka belted with a sense of familiarity. Leaving the Sith Lord to his own devices, Anakin's pupil and Vader's servant ran Iaso down. The Inquisitor's peon, terrified of everything she had just witnessed, posed no threat as both Jedi cut their way past her. Knowing he couldn't run, the tattooed Zabrak activated the unstable blade of his lightsaber and engaged. To his credit, Iaso was quite skilled. He could stand his ground against the pair of Jedi, but that was all he could do. In a one-on-one fight, the Inquisitor would have provided a proper challenge for Galen and Ahsoka both. However, that wasn't the fight before him. The The Jedi together were just too much. With a thrust from Galen and a slash from Ahsoka, he also met his end. The battle was over, and the Citadel devoid of life, save for those who merely stood within the twisted cathedral's entrance. With Anakin in his arms, Vader slowly walked toward Ahsoka as Galen readied himself for another fight. "It's okay," Ahsoka claimed while deactivating her lightsabers. "He isn't here for you." Reluctantly, the young Jedi put his weapon away and took a step back. The pair were going to get the space and time they needed. Though the former apprentice still hated Vader, his usual overwhelming rage had subsided to a manageable point due to the recent battle. It had acted as an outlet for Galen's bent-up aggression. The young Jedi wasn't calm, however his state of mind was stable enough to allow rational thought. Gently, Vader passed Anakin off without saying a word. In spite of that, however, Galen could sense his master's barely contained emotions. A lot of feelings were whirling around inside him, chief among them being guilt. Exhausted from his ordeal, Anakin looked up at his mother and smiled faintly. "Hey, Mom," the boy whispered. Ahsoka leaned in and pressed her forehead against her son's. The overwhelming sense of joy she was feeling made speaking nigh impossible. As the Sith Lord started to walk away, however, the former Jedi sat her son down and asked, "Why? Why did you do this?" With a hoarse voice, choking back everything she was feeling. Vader stopped and looked back. "To protect a bright spot." "Why say it like that?" Ahsoka shouted as tears rolled off her cheeks. "Why say that here? After all this time?" The distraught student moved toward her former master, but stopped as Galen placed his arms around her. "Not now," the young Jedi declared softly. "Not here." For just a moment, Vader and Galen exchanged a glance. Nothing was said, but the former apprentice could feel his master's gratitude. The experience was an odd one that the young Jedi couldn't properly process. Then, as he had many times before, the Sith Lord turned his back on his students and left them behind. "Anakin!" Ahsoka screamed in vain. "Anakin, come back!" Despite her best attempts to get away, Galen kept the heartbroken woman restrained as Vader slowly slipped away, back into darkness. "Come back," Ahsoka whimpered as she slowly dropped to her knees. "Please, just come back." Staring at the carnage which their battle had left in its wake, Galen realized something he never expected. For the first time in his life, he understood, truly understood, the man he once called master. It was a fact the former apprentice either hated or appreciated. He couldn't tell which. "We can't save him." "Not yet," the young Jedi said calmly. "If you go after him now, he will kill you." Ahsoka remained silent and placed her hands in Anakin's. "You're the only good thing, the only bright spot he has left," Galen continued while loosening his grip around the heartbroken woman. "You remind him of better times, and he can't handle that. If you stay around, he'll snuff out the light you give him, just like he did with me." Hearing the rumble of the Rogue Shadow's engines, the young Jedi helped Ahsoka up and took Anakin into his arms. "We'll save him one day, just not today," Galen declared. "Not alone." Aboard his starship, the young Jedi left Ahsoka and her son to their own devices as he set course for Raxus. With Proxy and Ziel sitting beside him, an exhausted Galen took a seat on the bridge and closed his eyes. Life had dealt him a bad hand, but in just a few short months, that had changed. Holding on to that thought, the young Jedi smiled and slowly drifted off to sleep.